Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the University of Córdoba. Welcome to this conference, to the 12th International Conference of Religion and Spirituality in Society. And first of all, let me introduce the members of the board here. I have Dr. Juan Pedro Monferrer Sala, who is the president of the conference. And I also have my colleague, Dr. Luis Roger Castillo, who is the president of the research networks. So we will start with this session today. We want to welcome you all and to have sit here if you want here in the first rows. And thank you. And the thing is that we will start now with the presentation, the introduction to this session today. And then we will have press conference by 9:30. And now, please, my colleague, Dr. Juan Pedro Monferrer.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everybody. So it's a great pleasure for me to be here today. Just only a few words, just to say hello and welcome to the University of Córdoba to attend this 12th International Congress on Religion and Spirituality in Society under the main title of Traveling Texts from Traditions to Religions. This 2022 International Conference is held here in the Faculty of Arts and Humanities, in Spanish, Facultad de Filosofía y Letras, which is quite different from the English title. And this building was built in the 18th century. And in the beginning, this was a kind of school for the core boys of the cathedral that is not far from here. And the cathedral is in the very heart of the old Umayyad mosque of the Muslim city during the medieval period. And actually, this is the Faculty of Humanities and Art, as I have said, and different master's degrees and degrees as well are taught in the faculty, such as history of art, the Spanish language and literature, also translation and interpretation, and English studies. And together with these main subjects are taught also Arabic studies, for instance, and also Greek and Latin studies, both from a literary and linguistic perspective. And we have also, and perhaps this is of some interest for all of you, a new master's on religious pluralism, which is taught between the University of Córdoba, some professors of this faculty, and the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. This is the second year, and this is a very, very instructive and very interesting masters offered by both universities, Córdoba and Groningen. And just as my last word is just to say welcome from our rector of the University of Córdoba, who cannot be here today, but he wishes a warm, and this is not a joke, a warm conference during the 2 following days. This is a kind of friendly heat wave that is visiting us during this last week, but I think that next week it will be better in the city of Córdoba. So enjoy the conference and enjoy as well the city and the lovely people. So thank you very much for coming, and have a nice stay at Córdoba and a fruitful conference in the Faculty of Art and Humanities. Welcome to Córdoba. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Monferrer. And again, well, my name is José Luis Ortega. I'm the scientific director of Common Ground Research Networks, on the side of the Spanish publications and conferences. I'd like to welcome you all again to the 12th edition of the International Conference on Religion and Spirituality in Society, as we mentioned. And this year we have in this conference 160 delegates from 39 countries participating here. and 100 person in the conferences here in our facilities from 27 different countries also. I'm more than happy that after an uncertainty with the pandemics that we have suffered, finally we can meet in person and exchange the knowledge without borders. Nevertheless, I'm happy to say also, to welcome also to those who were not able to travel due to different reasons to this conference here today in this lovely place, in this beautiful Córdoba, and this warm and always charming university. For over 30 years, Common Ground has been invested in developing technologies that seek to break down barriers of accessing scholarly communication. We have been working on different branches and different ideas, different studies. We have now more than 38 different publications, and some of them are now in these rankings that we all suffer from Scopus and all these things that we all academics have to go through. In each phase, we've built media platforms to support spaces for interdisciplinarity and especially for the interdisciplinary dialogue. Before such approaches were involved, we were working on that, and we've been working on that for many years. We have connected international voices when disciplines were too often isolated in national silos, and supported an agenda of access and equality by offering pathways and opportunities for diverse voices. We offer the Common Ground Scholar model that makes conferencing adapted to nowadays blended reality. We invite all of you to participate actively on the discussion boards and to interact with the digital media. Finally, I would like to thank the great work of the organizing committee, especially the conference chair, Juan Pedro Monferrer Sala, and the research network chair, Luis Roger Castillo, who have made this meeting possible. I'd also like to thank our colleague and the heart of all this conference, with Tatiana Portnova, and also our other colleague who is downstairs, Tamara Gorosankina, because they made things easy for all of us. And so I'd like to give a big applause for them too. And I also want to thank all those who now follow us online for their participation, and remember that they are part of the conference as well, in the same way as those who meet now in the classrooms. I invite you all to enjoy this program with a large number of presentations, and enjoy the sessions, activities, and also the coffee breaks, which are no less important for networking and exchanging knowledge. Common Ground Research Networks wants to thank the University of Córdoba, the rector, our colleague, the Professor Monferrer, and especially the Faculty of Philosophy today for bringing us together in this lovely place, in this beautiful building. And now I have to make a short translation of what we said for the Spanish section. Principalmente, bueno, dar la bienvenida, dar las gracias a los colegas de la Universidad de Córdoba que han hecho posible que podamos estar hoy aquí en este edificio sin par, en esta universidad de renombre, especialmente en este área que nos trae, ¿no? Como director científico de Common Ground Research Networks, pues bueno, le doy la bienvenida. Creo que todos habremos entendido ya en esa presentación en inglés que estamos haciendo. Pero bueno, tenemos ahora mismo 160 delegados de 39 países y aquí en particular unos 100 personas que vienen también o que vienen de 27 países diferentes. Han sido tiempos muy difíciles, nos ha costado mucho trabajo poder reunirnos de manera presencial y ahora por fin podemos hacerlo, y eso es la verdad que un avance a nivel de pandemia. Cuando no se trabajaba todavía estas cosas de la enseñanza virtual, no se trabajaba tanto, nosotros ya desde Common Ground, con la plataforma CG Scholar, pues sí veníamos trabajando esto y hacíamos que cualquiera de las conferencias que organizamos pudiera tener acceso cualquier persona desde cualquier punto del mundo, ¿no? Hemos dado las gracias y me reitero al comité organizador aquí en la Universidad de Córdoba. Por supuesto que eran esos aplausos que se oían a las colegas Tatiana Portnova y Tamara Gorosankina, que están abajo y que han hecho posible toda la parte de la organización. Por supuesto a los Emerging Scholars, que han estado también y que están al tanto y que van a estar en la moderación de la conferencia hoy. Y simplemente, pues, dar ahora paso a nuestro presidente de la red de investigación, Luis Roger Castillo, And now I want to introduce the president of the conference, of the chair of this network, who is Dr. Luis Roger Castillo. And then we can start the presentation of this first conference. Thank you.
Well, good morning. Welcome again to the 12th International Conference of Religion and Spirituality in Society in collaboration with the University of Córdoba. In the research network of religion and society have grown significantly among the 12 past years. Recently, the journal of the network, the International Journal of Religion and Spirituality in Society, has reached the second quartile of Scopus. In these past years, we have celebrated conferences in the United States, the United Kingdom, Spain, Canada, and Costa Rica. We have collaborated with, excuse my prolixity, University Center of Chicago, University of British Columbia, Robson Square, Arizona State University, the National University of Costa Rica, the University of California at Berkeley, the Catholic University of America, the Imperial College of London, the University of Granada, and last but not least, the University of Córdoba. The conference of this year is special because of two reasons. First, this year, fortunately, we may attend in person to the conference. The last 2 years, the conference took place in online modality, but of course, according to the standard qualities, the standard of quality and interest that we are used to. So the world may stop, but knowledge does not stop. Quoting the famous Seneca, an illustrious son of the city of Córdoba, quote, difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body, unquote. Second, this conference takes place in Córdoba, and of course, Córdoba is an excellent place for a conference about religion because this very city is founded upon the concordance and discordance of the three main Abrahamic religion, Judaism, Christianism, and Islam. It is in the very essence of the city, as the people who came yesterday to the conference may testify, of course. For instance, as probably you all know, this is the birthplace of Ibn Rushd, of Averroes, whom influenced the Islamic philosophy and also Christian theology in the Middle Ages. And this is also the place, the birthplace of Rabbi Moshe Ibn Maimon, known as Maimonides or the Ramban. And he used the philosophy and thought of Aristotle to explain the main tenets of religion, of Jewish religion. Even today, his legal responses are still considered of a great authority in Judaism. So this place is particularly adequate to this conference, and it is a pleasure for me as the chair and editor of the Research Network of Religion in Society that the University of Córdoba accepted to hold the conference this year. So a special thanks to the University of Córdoba, and of course, special thanks to Professor Juan Pedro Monferrer Sala, who, according to a terminology dear to Maimonides and Averroes, and of course to Aristotle, he is the prime mover and efficient cause of this conference. Just to announce, the next year conference shall take place in Athens in collaboration with the National and Capodistrian University of Athens, with the special focus on religion in the public sphere from the ancient years to the post-modern era. I hope after this year experience, you may also attend next year edition. Thank you very much. Bien, bienvenido a la 12ª edición del Congreso de Religión y Espiritualidad en la Sociedad en colaboración con la Universidad de Córdoba. Comentaba que a lo largo de estos 12 últimos años, la red de investigación que dirijo ha crecido significativamente y hemos hecho gran cantidad de ediciones internacionales de este congreso, colaborando con el Reino Unido, Estados Unidos, Canadá, Costa Rica, y hemos colaborado también con respectivas universidades de dichos países, como por ejemplo el University Center of Chicago, la Universidad de la Columbia Británica, Robson Square, la Universidad Estatal de Arizona, la Universidad Católica de Costa Rica, la Universidad de California en Berkeley, la Universidad Católica de América, el Colegio Imperial de Londres, la Universidad de Granada y por último, pero no por ello la menos importante, la Universidad de Córdoba. Además, la revista de Religion and Spirituality in Society, the International Journal, recientemente ha sido incorporada al segundo cuartil de Scopus, de manera que la red se expande de modo particular a lo largo de estos años. El congreso de este año es un congreso que tiene cierto carácter especial por dos motivos. El primer motivo es que es el primer congreso al que podemos asistir en persona, en vez de en modalidad online, como hemos venido celebrándolo los dos últimos años. Los dos últimos años se celebró en este formato, pero mantuvimos los estándares de calidad y los estándares de interés académico y de conocimiento a los que estamos acostumbrados en esta red de investigación. En este sentido, podemos citar a Séneca, cordobés, cuando dice que las dificultades fortalecen la mente igual que el trabajo fortalece el cuerpo. A lo largo de estos 2 años hemos tenido que crecer conforme a esas dificultades, incorporándonos al modelo blended o modelo online de congreso y se ha producido de una manera aceptablemente estupenda. En segundo lugar, este congreso es también significativo porque tiene lugar en Córdoba y era también un interés personal mío que se celebrase aquí por ser un sitio particularmente adecuado para un congreso internacional de religión y sociedad, porque la misma esencia de esta ciudad, en su devenir histórico, se fundamenta en la concordancia y discordancia entre las 3 principales religiones abrahámicas, el judaísmo, el cristianismo y el Islam, y del devenir que se produce a través de esa dialéctica histórica, en cierto modo, lo que constituye la Córdoba contemporánea. Hay 2 grandes figuras que me gustaría citar en ese sentido. Una es la figura de Ibn Rushd, Averroes, cuyo lugar de nacimiento obviamente es Córdoba, y la importancia que tiene su obra en el ámbito filosófico, pero también en el ámbito teológico, tanto en el ámbito islámico como igualmente en su influencia en la teología cristiana durante la Edad Media. Una de las principales autoridades citadas por Santo Tomás, por ejemplo, Santo Tomás de Aquino en la Suma Teológica, a que se refieren siempre bajo el respetuoso título del comentarista, por antonomasia, como el comentarista de Aristóteles. También, dentro del ámbito de la filosofía aristotélica, destaca la figura de Maimónides, o el Rambam, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimón, que todavía sus responsa legales se consideran de gran autoridad, de máxima autoridad dentro del ámbito de la interpretación de la ley judía y que además también es uno de los pioneros en el uso de la filosofía aristotélica para explicar los componentes religiosos, en este caso en su aplicación al judaísmo, pero nuevamente su influencia se extendió por toda Europa e incluso en el pensamiento judío contemporáneo llega hasta nuestros días. De manera que me siento particularmente orgulloso como director de la Red Internacional de Religión en Sociedad, de Religión y Espiritualidad en Sociedad. Este año podamos celebrar el Congreso aquí en Córdoba, gracias a la Universidad de Córdoba y gracias al profesor Juan Pedro Monferrer Sala, al doctor Juan Pedro Monferrer Sala, sin cuya inestimable colaboración este Congreso no hubiera sido posible. Y así, empleando una terminología cara a Maimónides y Averroes, el primer motor y la causa eficiente última de este Congreso. El año que viene, el Congreso se celebrará en Atenas, en colaboración con la Universidad Nacional y Capodistriana de Atenas. El tema especial del Congreso será religión en la esfera pública desde la Edad Antigua a la era postmoderna. Espero que la experiencia de este año en el Congreso sea particularmente satisfactoria y que podamos vernos de nuevo en la edición del próximo año. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Dr. Roger. Thank you for the presentation, both Spanish and English, for our Spanish speakers. that we have here today and that we also have online. And some technical aspects before we start. Presentations, remember that are only accepted in PDF format. Our computers do not work with PowerPoint. So if you have any problems, we downstairs at the reception desk, we can convert the files into the PDF if necessary. Remember also that this is room 1 in your program. If you see room 1, this is also room 1. And so any of the conferences or sessions held in that room, they mean this is the room where we have to be. Dinner is tonight. It's going to be in a special place at Taberna del Rio. You can still register yourself here before lunch time at the registration desk downstairs also. And lunch and coffee breaks will take place in the cafeteria. And we have regular menu, of course, and vegan options if needed by any of you. And this is it. We'll have Tatiana, Tamara, the emerging scholars, any of us here to help you to try to make this stay here in the University of Córdoba and this common ground conference to, well, fulfill and achieve all the objectives that you have when you come to one of our conferences. Me gustaría, bueno, decir algunas cosas ya para terminar, unos aspectos técnicos. Solamente las presentaciones se pueden admitir en formato PDF, no en PowerPoint. Si hay alguien que necesite cambiar el formato, abajo en el desk que tenemos en el desk de bienvenida, registration desk, que tenemos en la planta de abajo, se puede hacer sin problema ninguno. Cuando vean en el programa la room 1, la habitación 1, se refiere a este mismo espacio en el que estamos ahora. Esta noche tenemos la cena en la Taberna del Río, en un sitio espectacular, unas vistas muy bonitas, y si alguien no se ha registrado y quiere hacerlo, lo puede hacer hasta la hora del almuerzo en esta mañana, abajo también en el registration desk, y que el lunch y coffee breaks serán abajo en la cafetería. Yo creo que ya algunos conocemos dónde está el espacio, y hay, además del menú normal, pues, un menú vegano si fuera necesario, y si necesitan comunicarlo pueden hacerlo también a cualquiera de nosotros. ¿De acuerdo? Well, again, just to start in 3 minutes, we will start with the first conference. We want to thank you all. We have like 3 minutes to, well, breathe and get prepared for this wonderful conference that we have to start this beautiful conference here in Córdoba. Thank you again. Thank you for being here. Thank you for organizing this at the university. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we thank you deeply. And thank you all for being here. It's wonderful to see you all again, and not all of you through the screens as we have been suffering for some years now. Okay, so thank you. Thank you.
Sí, o si quieres a mi despacho luego y lo hacemos en mi despacho y lo imprimimos.
Okay, so we will start with the plenary session.
Bells ringing not far from here. So it's time to introduce our first plenary speaker. And this task was to be done by my colleague Israel Muñoz Gallarte, who is not here today because he lost his voice last night, perhaps because of the condition, I don't know. But here I am just to introduce to Professor Antonio Piñero Sáenz. And this is a great pleasure to me because he is one of the most conspicuous scholars on religious studies in Spain, mainly in Judaism and early Christianity. And he has taught during a lot of years in Complutense University in several fields of study, history, philology, and also exegesis, all time concerning Judaism and Christianity. Professor Antonio Piñero Sáenz is a Spanish philologist, writer, and historian specialized in the Judaism before Christianity, the life of Jesus of Nazareth, the founding of Christianity, and the language and literature of the New Testament and early Christianity. He is especially known in the Spanish-speaking world for the authorship of numerous books and research activities, and for his active outreach efforts, for instance, in television, in Spanish television. In 2016, he received the Tritemius Award from the Sociedad de Estudios e Investigaciones, the Study and Research Society, Spagidicas and Publishing House Tritemio, for his contribution to the world of culture and his endeavor in all facets to teacher, researcher, and writer. As a result of his work in translating the non-canonical Gospels, New Testament academic research, broad participation and dissemination in several activities and numerous publications, Professor Piñero has become one of the most influential agnostic Spanish exegetes and authors in the study of early Christianity, mainly during the 1st and 2nd centuries. In his work, Professor Piñero focuses on the historical Jesus. Therefore, he tries to separate the religious interpretation from the historical reconstruction of Jesus through historical and philological methods. Similarly, he also addresses the first steps of the early Christianity, trying to clarify the evolution of the first communities of followers of Jesus of Nazareth. His lecture today has the title of Historical and Literary Issues regarding the pseudo-Clementine writings. So, Professor Piñero, when you want.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, very many thanks to the organizers for thinking of me to open this important event. Thank you very much indeed. In advance, I apologize because of my poor, weak English. I belong to another generation which did not learn English at school. My considerations will be simple and will revolve around the issues that arise when editing for a wide but cultural public a multilingual edition of the Clementine literature, also called the Novel of Clement, or the Clementia, perhaps the first great Christian novel, whose basic writing is probably dated at the beginning of the 3rd century. First, which text of the two existing Greek and Latin recensions should be given priority? Quite simply, which of the two texts should be placed first in a book offering the Clementines to the public today? Curiously enough, when publishing this text, serious problems arises as to which of the two recensions, Greek or Latin, is to be given chronological priority. Because to be placed first in a new edition depends on it. As the Clementia, after all, a novel, both recensions called homilies and recognitions, it would be logical that the older text should be found in the recension that has retained the probable original name. Recognitions.
Antonio,
That is the
Antonio.
Latin.
por favor, ¿puedes desconectar tu micrófono? Es que a veces aquí se corta el sonido. A ver si así funciona mejor. Inténtalo ahora.
No sé si me verán ustedes ahora.
Pero te oímos mejor. Puedes seguir, puedes seguir.
Bueno. It would be logical that the older text should be found in the recension that has retained the probable original name. Recognitions. ¿Se me oye?
Se corta en ocasiones, pero se te oye.
The reason is that I am living in a very small village at North Spain between mountains, and the internet is very poor. But the argument is not valid for editing recognitions in the first place. It is necessary to verify weighing arguments and counter-arguments whether the two recensions independently rework the presumed primitive novel, or whether homilies, new recognitions, or whether they are indications that it was the other way around. The meticulous analysis of scholars who have devoted years to the studies of the Clementines fail to agree. In our opinion, the decision of Bernhard Rehm, the editor of the two recensions, who argues in favor of the priority of homilies, weighs a little more heavily. And this is the reason why we, I beg your pardon? Can I? ¿Sigo?
Sigue, sigue, Antonio, sigue.
This is the reason why we, Gonzalo del Cerro and me, edit homilies first, probably against the opinion of some scholars, Rius Camps, for instance, and Jiménez de Aragon. The Syriac text edited by Paul de Lagarde and Wilhelm Frankenberg, which partially contains versions of both recognitions and homilies, presents recognitions at the first place. This fact, however, does not help to decide on the priority of recognitions as it can be read today in Rufinus' translation, unless we consider that the mentioned Syriac text of recognitions, with quite a number of variants and some of considerable importance, as will be noted in the footnotes of the Spanish edition, is earlier than the preserved in up to the present day homilies. This is possible if we compare the days of the Syriac manuscript 5th century with those of the P and O, the only two manuscripts of homilies, 11th, 12th, perhaps 14th centuries. But we cannot prove it either because, as I have already indicated, the oldest Syriac manuscript on which we depend is dated of the year 411. And by that date, both the extant homilies and recognitions were already in existence. To complicate the matter, it must be said that it seems certain that the Syriac text predates the Greek text that Rufinus, the Latin translator, had before his eyes. The readings of the Syriac text reproduced in the notes of the Spanish editions to recognitions, Spanish edition forthcoming in October, to recognitions 1st to 4, makes it clear, even to the less experienced reader, how the Greek text from which Rufinus translated has already eliminated parts of the Greek traditions which were shocking, prolix, unorthodox, too Jewish, or obscurely worded. Rufinus' text was therefore a revision of an earlier Greek text, which the Syriac translator perhaps, only perhaps, followed. The Syriac text of homilies 10 to 14 is a very exact translation of the extant Greek homilies, so that if we compare Rem's Greek text with Wilhelm Frankenberg's retroversion to the Syriac into Greek, we certainly find variants, but few and generally of minor importance. Nevertheless, we have included practically all the divergences in the critical apparatus of homilies, Greek text, and in the Spanish footnotes. It is a real fortune for our Spanish edition that Wilhelm Frankenberg has carefully contrasted the text and printed in italics the Greek variant underlying the Syriac. Second, importance of the Clementines for the history of Judaism and Christianity. The Clementine literature is important for the knowledge of Judaism in general of the 3rd and 4th centuries, and in particular of Judeo-Christianity, and of course for the history of the general Christian church in those centuries, as far as the Clementia are an important witness to the multiple and pluriform Christianity and Judaism of that period. Moreover, the Clementia undoubtedly preserve very ancient traditions. The Clementines have begun recently to be seen as a good illustration of how normative Judaism, Judeo-Christianity, and Catholicism had, at least in the 3rd and 4th centuries, relatively blurred ideological boundaries. Movement of persons from one group to the other was not uncommon among believers of these three monotheistic denominations, at least in the lower cultural strata. Syria, in all its breadth, from Celesyria or Phoenician Syria to Edessa in the Far East, was at that time a hotbed of various Christianities. The group of, for instance, the group of Bardissan and his followers, Marcionites, Arians, Manichaeans, together with Judeo-Christians, Jews, more or less Orthodox Catholics, to which we must naturally add the various paganisms, among which some important philosophers stood out. It seems to me, therefore, that Clementines are an indispensable source for the study of Christianity and Judaism in the 3rd and 4th centuries, at least in Syria, as they reflect precisely this environment and that of Judeo-Christianity in particular. I believe that the time has passed when it was thought of that Clementine literature contribute nothing to the study of the history and theology of the great church, but could at best serve as a repository of somewhat bizarre theological ideas. The Clementia are no longer considered to be just a messy and relatively clumsy amalgamation of ancient sources. It was this reasoning that was at the heart of the tremendous and perhaps obsessive search for sources since the 19th century, especially in German philology and theology. Today, the overall view of the Clementines is that of a novelistic theological tale with only a certain coherence, a common phenomenon at that time, but a novel more interested in the question of attaining the truth offered by salvation than in the vicissitudes of his protagonist. The interest of the Clementines is, above all, an epistemological, salvific one, for sure, although it does not neglect entertainment. At the same time, both homilies and recognitions are seen today as a reflection of the educated Judeo-Christian religious society of the 4th century and a clear exponent of the fact already mentioned that the strict division between Judaism, including Judeo-Christianity, and main ways of Christianity took many more centuries to crystallize than is commonly thought. And as I already said, that no clear-cut boundaries can be drawn between these religions until perhaps after the 5th century onwards. Boston Reed and Jan Bremer point out that the Clementines had a certain success up to the Middle Ages among Jewish and Christian apocryphal literature, for we find fragments of them in Old Slavonic and Ethiopic, and that in the 13th century, even a versification in Old French circulated. Moreover, the material of the homilies and recognitions as an authentic apostolic tradition is, quote, in a wide spectrum of medieval works, ranging from the writings of Byzantine chronographers, such as the monk George Syncellus, up to scientific and theological treatises by reputed scholars in the Latin West, such as Isidore of Sevilla, Bede the Venerable, and later Thomas of Aquinas. Although the interest in the Clementines since Ferdinand Christian Baur, who based upon the Clementia his view on the division and evolution of Christianity into three stages: Petrinism, Paulinism, and the Catholic Church. I say this interest lasted until the last third of the 20th century and then rapidly collapsed. I have the impression that this diminished interest is reviving at the present time, though certainly not in pursuit of the ancient vein of the study of sources, to inquire into the origin and evolution of ancient Christianity, especially of the 2nd century, but rather in terms of historical, sociological, and literary studies for a better understanding of the era reflected in the novel, that of the 3rd and 4th centuries, and for a better understanding also of the text of the narrative itself. Giovanni Bazzana, for his part, points out the interest of new stylistic and lexical studies. Donald H. Carlson emphasizes the research on the exegetical ideas and techniques of the authors of the Clementines, which reveal new perspectives on exegesis. The relationship between Judaism and Christianity is an interesting topic explored in depth by Annette Yoshiko Reed from a historical, sociological, or even rhetorical point of view. By analyzing the internal literary characteristics of the final form of the Clementines, she, Annette, believes that a better understanding of the 4th century Judaism and Christianity can be offered. A better understanding, I repeat, too, of their self-definitions and of the various issues on the many possibilities of encounter or dissension between the different religious groups of Hellenistic Roman Syria, whose main language was no doubt Aramaic, but with large sections of the population who understood Greek as well. Third, the historical literary problems of the Clementines. As I already indicated at the beginning of this talk, the literary historical questions about the Clementines arise from the mere existence of two disparate versions, or rather recensions, of a nuclear novelized story full of theological discourse with a multitude of very similar or simply similar passages, and a multitude too of dissimilarities and even notorious contradictions. The original novel was undoubtedly composed in Greek. It is not in itself a major problem that one of these two recensions had been lost and that only a Latin version exists, as it is well known that in antiquity, translations from Greek into Latin usually tended to be quite literal. Besides, the fact that the original Greek version is undoubtedly lost and only partially recovered, part of the literary and historical problem lies in the fact that, in addition to the Latin translation by Rufinus, there is also, as I told you, a Syriac version, as you already know. But the question is how to explain in a satisfactory way the pluromorphic picture of successive phases of composition described by research so far, which naturally include the reconstructible basic writing or basic structure of the Greek homilies and of the recognitions. At the beginning of the 19th century, in France, Germany, and England, began the modern editions of this literature and the first attempts to clarify its difficulties and its importance for the history of Christianity. At this century, the essential questions from the historical literary point of view were already raised. Who was the author or authors? At what date and place were the Clementia composed? Basic questions were also asked. Is there an earlier writing behind these two recensions, the use of which explains the similarities between them? Can it be suspected that there are different sources behind each recension? Could be reconstructed some of the presumed sources that had been used by these two recensions, of if they can clearly distinguish at all among the groups of use of Christian known to us at the dawn of Christianity. We ask, can some be identified which might be able to respond for the theological ideas deduced from each of these recensions? Has the Clementia been preserved in his entirety, or have part of them been lost? For example, the beginning and the end. Can these lost parts be reconstructed, at least in their essentials, can we discern their ulterior remodelations? To each and these and similar questions, there have been, since the beginning of the 19th century, quite contrary or contradictory answers. What Oscar Kuhlman wrote about the presumed basic writing is even more appropriate for the Clementines as a whole. The basic writing is not an original work conceived in a single stroke. It is an encyclopedia on which various authors collaborate. He said, a year earlier, Carl Schmitt has already complained about the plurality of opinions of the whole problem of the Clementines. So many heads, so many explanations. Tot capita quod sententiae. And a few years ago, Jan Bremer could give an almost identical assessment of the current state of Clementine research. Virtually everything is obscure about the work commonly known as pseudo-Clementines. Debates have been raging for a century, and scholarship has not yet reached a consensus on the nature of the work, its sources of inspiration, date and place of composition, and on the author himself and his milieu. In my opinion, the literary historical problems of the Clementines are for the moment insoluble, unless new documents appear, which is highly improbable. I will briefly mention the most important issues in contention, offering a bird's eye view of the answers. With respect to the basic writing, first, should its existence be maintained as the mere existence of the two mentioned but similar recension demands? Second, why its existence has been at least partially denied? Thus, Jürgen Wenner, who argues that the claim of deriving the material of actual Clementines from a basic writing or from the Kerygmata Petru, preachings of Peter, considered by many scholars to be the main source of the Clementia, on the basis of an analysis of their different theologies, is based, so maintained Wenner, on a flawed method which proceeds circularly. Or third, why the existence of a basic writing has been radically denied. So, John Chapman in part, or Edward Schwartz in full. The majority opinion, however, since Adolf Schliemann, 1844, especially since Hans Weitz, German, Weitz, around 1991, is in favor of the existence of the basic writing. Their content can be reconstructed from recognitions first 75, only if recognitions and homilies coincide at least in allusions. So Hans Joachim Schöpf, especially after Adolf Hilgenfeld's steps. But the system or method of reconstructing the basic writing is not identical in any commentator, and the results vary greatly. The tenor of the basic writing has generally been described as Judeo-Christian, referring naturally to its theology. So most scholars since Ferdinand Christian Baur and Gustav Ullhorn in the 19th century. Or, on the contrary, is maintained that it was not Judeo-Christian at all, but it has elements of a very varied Christianity of the 2nd century, where there was no clear orthodoxy. So the minority position, or that it was a syncretistic theology, Jewish in essence. So Joseph Thomas. It was, or it has been also claimed that if the author was a Judeo-Christian one, his ancestry was Ebionite. So, since Ferdinand Christian Baur and Schoeps, perhaps with plenty of contacts with Essenism, or on the contrary, that the Clementia have no close relationship with the Essens or Essenism. So, Johann Meyer. As to whether the Judeo-Christianity of the basic writing of the Clementines was Gnostic or not, positions are also divided. Oscar Kuhlmann and Georg Strecker defend it strongly, while Schoeps claims that the Judeo-Christianity of the Clementines has nothing to do with Gnosis, or that the alleged Gnosticizing basic Judaism of his main source, the mentioned Kerygmata Petru, preachings of Peter, is simply Judeo-Christian, very similar to that of the Ebionites and partly El-Kasaites. It has also been argued that this Judeo-Christianity was already very close to the general Catholicism of the 4th century, and that it was like a preamble to a fusion of the two communities, so Arthur Heflin, and that the theology of the Clementine is already Catholic, as it accepts the Trinitarian formula of baptism after compromise between Judeo-Christianity and Pauline theology reflected in Acts of the Apostles 15. Likewise, that the constitution of the church defended by the Clementine Peter is Catholic because it resembles that of the pastoral epistles, and that their basic postulates were acceptable to the Catholicism of the time. So Carl Schmidt or Arthur Hedlund. But on the other side, some argue that the theology or constitution of the church of the Clementines are not Catholic at all, but expressly Judeo-Christian Gnostic against the great church. So, Oscar Kuhlmann. Others defend that it's totally syncretic, as its background is Platonism, the overall thought of Philo of Alexandria, and Stoicism vulgarized, and that there are even of influence of astrology and magic in the same way as in the works of philosophers of the 3rd and 4th centuries. It has also claimed that the Clementia are the evidence of the final union of Judaism and Catholicism. So, for instance, Joseph Langen, and that they present an Apostle Peter who did not intend to attract people to Judaism, but simply to monotheism. So, hence, Weitz. Or that the basic writing was not anti-Pauline, Weitz. Or, on the contrary, that it was rabidly anti-Pauline, Kuhlmann. If the existence of the basic writing is admitted, it is usually placed at the end of the 2nd century. For instance, Schoeps, others at the 4th century. John Chapman. Weitz argues that the basic writing saw the light in Rome, although most opt for Syria, Transjordania, or Palestine. Concerning the integrity of the basic text, it has been argued that, first, that the Epistula Petri, the Contestatio, and the Epistula of Clement, texts which only appear in the Greek version, belong to the basic writing from his very birth. So, the majority opinion. Therefore, they form a compact whole with the Kerygmata Petri, and that they show an Ebionite community, totally anti-Marcionite and anti-Gnostic. So, Schoeps. Or second, on the contrary, that these 3 letters are a later interpolation. So, Rem, especially the Epistle of Clement, who was composed by the homilies. About the beginning of the basic writing, homilies first and recognitions first. It is generally held that it has been lost, Rem, but it is equally argued that it has not been lost, Strecker. The real existence of the character of Clemens Romanus within the basic writing is doubted by Gustav Ullhorn, supported by Werner Heinze. Both argue that the early disputations between Peter and Simon Magus in the Clementia did not feature the character of Clement Romanus at all, which is a late addition. But, on the contrary, the majority holds that the later is not possible, and that it was the author of the basic writing himself who added this character, Clemens Romanus, into the novel from the beginning. On the source of the basic writing, there is also a variety of opinions. Denial of them that it is nothing but pure pseudo-history born of a single hand. Others defend, on the contrary, a remarkable skepticism regarding the possible success of source criticism. For instance, Gerd Lügemann. That is, the sources are hardly discernible. The opposite goes as far as the energetic defense of the existence of sources. That is horrible. This question of the basic writing sources was initiated at the very beginning of the research, since a reputable author as Richard Lipsius differentiated the basic writing from the so-called Kerygmata Petri as his source. He was immediately followed by Adolf Hilgenfeld, who further claimed that the Kerygmata had been combined by someone unknown, of course, with another source called Periodi Petru, although Richard Lipsius maintained that the Kerygmata Petru depended on an earlier Ebionite source not called Periodo, but Praxeis Petru, Acts of Peter, etc., etc. Yes, this is a pure contradiction. That the main source of the basic writing was the Kerygmata Petru is supported by Hans Baez. That the source was inspired by the words of Justin Martyr, both the dialogue, the first apology, and the lost syntagma egesmation is affirmed almost to this day, as Frederick Mans says, etc. As I already mentioned, the reconstruction of the Kerygmata Petru is recognition's third 35, but it is probably that this passage is a mere fiction, although the themes are recognizable in recognitions. But once admitted the existence of the Kerygmata Petru, a multitude of opinions have been expressed on the characteristics of his work. That this Kerygmata had Gnostic feature was defended by most scholars since Bauer, especially Kuhlmann. The Gnostic character is undoubtedly visible in their dualism embodied in the doctrine of the prayers, in the notion of male and female prophecy, and in the origin of evil. But others defend with all energy that there is nothing of gnosis. Schutz, concerning the influence of Elkasain, is the same. Finally, a special Judeo-Christian suit has been postulated for recognitions 1:27:71. The majority as defended by Jiménez de Aragon, but there is no consensus on the unity of the passage. No one denies the absolute influence of Bardizan, but if the influence of Bardizan is widely defended, the extent and depth of such influence is hotly disputed. Some scholars go so far as to think that really the virtual author of the basic writing is Bardizan, albeit through an interposed hand. So is the opinion of Joseph Riuskamp. About the novelistic aspect of the basic writing, have been postulated that its plot came from the author's pure imagination, since from Berger, others that even if this plot was the product of the inventiveness of basic writing author, he has used elements of the traditional Greek novel, etc., and so on. One defends that the novel is purely Greek. Bernhard Poderon, on the contrary, sustained that the novel was totally Jewish. About the homilies author is terrific. A general consensus is totally unknown, and that he must have been a Judeo-Christian or simple Judeo-Christian, Gnostic or Gnostic, he is conversant with Arian controversy, as the author maintained that the Logos is a mere man. That is one opinion, but some hold that the homilies is pre-Nicene, while others hold that is post-Nicene. The majority has doubt about this. About the offer of recognitions, underlying the Latin version, a majority thinks that he was rather close to the Catholic theological position, but another thinks that he was not Catholic at all. About Rufinus' versions of recognitions, there is a consensus that he, Rufinus, has indirectly confessed that he has omitted, was unorthodox in his eye. But it must be accepted that from time to time, Rufinus' Latin seemed expansive. The relationships between homilies and recognitions is also hotly disputed. The majority opinion, strongly defended by Georg Strecker, is that the two recitations used in the basic writing independently of each other. But a minority of scholars holds that the priority of the recognitions must be recognized. So, as I told you, Rius comes at Jiménez de Aragon. But Carl Schmitt disagrees about this relationship. Recognitions had not only the basic writing at his disposal, but also the homily. Schmitt is followed by Rem, although the later says the inexistence of absolute proof. I can be all the day taking the contradictions and possibilities, but I think I must stop here. Research on the author's intention, direct source of the speeches of Peter and others in the Clementines, the sources from Posidonius, from Cicerus de Natura, the ONU, the astrological writings as they collected by Firmicus Maternus, the figure of Paul in the Clementine, never explicit mention, is presented as declared antinomist in the background of the Clementia, but on the other side, as a nomist. That is exactly the contrary. In concluding this brief overview of Clementine research and of the radical disparity of scholarly interpretations in the appreciation of almost every important issues, it is clear, I think, that the literary, historical, multifaceted question of the Clementia, I repeat, is insoluble, an impossible one. My own very long introduction, almost 260 pages, to the Spanish edition forthcoming in October of this year, is a clear proof of it. Sincerely, I have no hope of having cleared up not even a small part of the historical and literary questions of the Clementia, as I indicated at the beginning of this communication. Jan Brenner would be also of my opinion. Thank you very much. That's it.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Piñero, for this interesting conference on the corpus of the pseudo-Clementine writings and its relations with several early Christian groups as the El Kesaim, the Ebionim, and some others, and also with some sectarian groups of Jewish religion, like Essenism, for instance. And thank you very much to all of you for resisting as good soldiers because of so many technical problems with interruptions, perhaps due to the situation of that small village among the Galician mountains. But I have remembered a famous song by Mahalia Jackson which says, "Oh, Jesus, don't move the mountains." Well, thank you very much, Professor Piñero. I don't know if it makes sense to have to pose questions to the author, and I propose to be in touch with him through email just to get the writing, the written text, just to experience the whole information gathered by Professor Piñero, which is quite interesting. And then you can make questions through the email if you prefer. I think this is better. You know? So, Antonio.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. You are quite right. Email is preferable because the questions are really difficult.
And they can read the whole text.
The whole day. But I think it is clear that is so hotly disputed that it is impossible to find a solution, but that the Clementines offer a very vivid picture of the Christianity in Syria in the 4th century. That is totally clear for me.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Piñero. And now it's time to coffee. We have the break coffee. Thank you very much, Antonio.
Thank you. Thank you.